Okay, so we just talked about how the Cold War now spread to Asia, and this was immediately causing problems after 1949 and the Chinese Civil War came to a close, because 1950 the Korean War started, and this is a direct result of the communist victory in China. So, after World War II, Korea was divided in half. The northern half, that had been largely liberated by the Soviets, was basically built into a communist government and a communist state um, under Kim Il Sung, who is the current leader's grandfather, and he was kind of installed by the Soviet Union and given money and weapons and supplies by the Soviet Union to get going and get control. But the South was largely liberated by the Americans, and therefore American soldiers were already stationed there, and they helped them to build a democratic and capitalist society under a guy called Syngman Rhee. And these two halves of the Korean peninsula both wanted to be reunited as one country, but only under their ideology. So the communists in the north wanted the whole peninsula to be communist, and the capitalists in the south wanted the whole peninsula to be capitalist. And there's no way to solve this ideological difference. It kind of represents the Cold War in a very small, a much smaller area. So what happens is, when the communists have the victory in China, they obviously have lots of money and weapons to spare. Well, particularly weapons, maybe not so much money, but weapons, military equipment, and they start to supply the North Koreans. The North Koreans see what's happened, and it kind of inspires them. You think, well, if they've won their civil war, we can win a Korean civil war and make this whole peninsula communist, and that will be better for us. We'll be a much more strong, powerful country. The people will be living under a communist system, which they think is a fairer, better system. And so they launch an immediate attack in the middle of 1950 on the south, invading, pushing the American troops and the Korean troops out of the way, killing obviously thousands of them. And the South Koreans go to the UN for help. Now, the UN, crucially, has this Security Council, which has 5 permanent members: Britain, America, France, Russia, and China. Soviet Union, obviously at the time, and China. And the thing is, at the time, though, the UN didn't recognise the communists as the official government of China. They recognised the defeated nationalists. So they were the ones in China's seat. So because of that, the Russians were saying, well, if you're not going to let our communist friends who run China now be in this organisation, then we're not going to be here. So when the Security Council voted on whether they should help out the South Koreans and send troops to protect them from the North Koreans, the communist Chinese aren't there because they're not allowed, and the Russians, the Soviets, aren't there because they're basically boycotting the Security Council, so they can't use their veto power, and the veto is the power to block or cancel a vote. So they don't do that, and the Security Council votes to actually pass the resolution and send troops to Korea to fight against the communists that have invaded the South. And around 15 countries do that. Mainly American troops, but also British and other troops, go to Korea and start fighting for South Korea. Now, they start to really lose at first. They got pushed back all the way to the southern city of Busan. And then the Americans send hundreds of thousands of more troops, including the Marine Corps, X-Corps, who are very highly trained, skilled troops, and they start to push them back during the rest of 1950, push them all the way back north, all the way back into their country, and then they carry on and invade, go beyond containment and invade North Korea, and push the North Korean army all the way up to the north as far as the Yalu River, which is the border with China, and they even cross into China. China is furious about this and sends about 250,000 troops in to help the North Koreans. This is a true proxy war now. You've got communists from North Korea and China fighting on one side with the help of money and weapons from Russia, and on the south you've got mainly American troops but also South Koreans, and a range of others from other United Nations countries. And it doesn't go beyond this war because everyone knows it would lead to nuclear war. Even General MacArthur, who was in charge of the southern forces, the forces from the United Nations, said to Truman, we should nuke China. China's now getting involved in this. If we nuke like a couple of cities like Beijing and Shanghai, then we'll deal with the problem, because they won't risk a nuclear war because they haven't got nuclear weapons. But Truman recognises the danger of this and goes back to a policy of containment where he just wants to protect South Korea from communism. Eventually, by 1953, this turns into kind of a stalemate at the original border, and they have been settled there for a while, actually, by 1953. And a new president, Eisenhower, comes in and makes a peace deal because he doesn't want any more money, weapons, and American lives losing in the Korean War. It does a peace deal. By 1953, the whole thing's over. Technically still at war today, but the deal that they'd said they're not going to actually fight anymore. So the border is where the border was at that time in 1953.